hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of Certified Forgotten. I am, as always, Matt Monagle. I'm one half of your hosts. I'm joined by my partner in crime, Matt Donato. Say hi, Matt Donato.
Hi, Matt Donato. Haha, see, I did the dumb joke.
You did. I have watched so much Dimension 20, which is a reference that's going to completely miss everybody here. But like, I feel myself doing Brennan Lee Mulligan's introduction. Well, hello, adventurers. Say hi, intrepid adventurers. And it's just sort of like, if you know, you know. I've got to stop listening to other live video stuff because I'm stealing all their bits.
Okay, I
Um,
know what D20 is, but I didn't know that was a thing they did. And you've done that exact intro multiple times now. I didn't know you were ripping that off from
it's
another
it
podcast.
started as my own thing, but it's teetering a little bit on plagiarism. So I'm going to work that back a little bit. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, you chose a really, really good one to check in on. As always, we are the internet's horror podcast that talks about films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. That's our niche. That's our lane. We own it. We kill it, pun intended. And we bring in really amazing guests to talk about the kind of movies that you may not have heard of or that you may have overlooked for a really long time. But trust us, they're worth talking about. They're worth seeing. And we always have people, I think, when we bring on guests that are great at talking about their movies and the reason that they picked it and the reason they love it. But today's guest is literally a fucking scholar in the area of the film that they're bringing in. So, Donato, introductions are in order, please.
Absolutely. Today we have someone who is publishing a book called Millennial Nasties, which is about 2000s horror, a genre near and dear to my heart if you read my Revenge of the Remakes column. So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about there. You've also read their work, Ghouls Magazine, and also Certified Forgotten. It is Ariel Powers-Schaub.
Woo!
Ariel, welcome.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
So, Ariel, it's great to have you on the podcast. You are part of that smaller, but just as, if not more, beloved pipeline of people who wrote for the site first and then joined us on the podcast. That's near and dear to my particular heart. And as
I didn't
always,
know I was in a cool club. I love that.
oh yeah, you are. It is the crossover of people who've done both is sort of like the hosted SNL 5 times kind of thing. It's like rarefied territory, and those are the people that Donato and I are particularly happy and proud to know. But with our relationship to the horror genre, one of the first things we like to talk about on the podcast is how our guest got started in horror, what those early sort of formative memories are. And I'd love to start there with you and kind of talk about when you first realized, what age you realized that there was this genre of movies that maybe did something a little bit extra for you compared to all the other types of stuff you'd watched.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had like a strong memory with a cool story. But the truth is that I don't remember a time in my life before horror. Like, literally, do not. Like, it was always just there because my parents are big horror fans and I have an older brother who was a horror fan. And so, like, growing up, like learning to walk, like pulling myself up on the shelves, it was like Stephen King books and then like Universal horror movies, VHSs
Nice.
on the other side. And like creepy stories around the campfire was a big thing. Friday night movie night in my family was a big thing, and we'd watch scary stuff. Um, I I always found it fun. Like, I always just wanted to be a little bit creeped out. There's a story my mom likes to tell about when she took me to see Fern Gully in the theater, and I was maybe like 4, and Hexus, the pollution monster, really scared me, and I started crying. And so my mom took me out to the lobby and was like, "Would you like to go home?" And I said, "No, we have to go back in. We have to see what happens." And so, like, it literally has just always been there. Um, I think like kind of a before and after point in my life is when I saw the Blair Witch Project in theaters when I was 12.
Yeah.
And I had no idea going in what it was going to be. I hadn't seen any of the viral marketing. My dad and my brother would just like get in the car, we're going to the movies. So we did that, and I thought I didn't know what I was watching because I'd never heard about found footage, and so afterwards I was like really scared, and they had to explain to me what I just saw. And so like that was a really big moment, but that's not where it started.
I think that the gamut of horror experiences that we've talked about, Fern Gully to the Blair Witch Project is, I gotta say, that's unique. We've heard Blair Witch a couple of times. Fern Gully has not come up in folks' horror origin stories before, and I kind of fucking love that because that movie is deeply, deeply scary. We talk
It
about
really
gateway
is.
horror sometimes on the podcast and on the website. That is gateway horror for sure.
Big time. There's a lab rat, like, or a bat rather. And like that's horrifying. Like his little song he sings when you're a kid, you're just like, this is a fun little song. As an adult, I'm like, oh my God, this is horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I was my weird childhood thing was Five Goes West. There's like a crazy spider, and the
Oh,
spider is not scary itself, but
yes.
as a little kid, when the spider first comes out, he's like looking in a glass bottle, and his eyes are all crazy. And yeah, that was my little go hide behind the blanket or under, a couch or a chair
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. So that was Five Goes West. If you want another one, that is another kids thing that kind of traumatized me very early, but I loved Five dearly. That was one of my go tos.
We watched that one a lot too. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was another one where we scared the shit out of ourselves
Yeah.
as little kids.
And of course, I think everybody that's within our age group remembers All Dogs Go to Heaven and just how fucking
Dude,
horrifying that nightmare hell sequence was too. So
I refused to watch it as an adult. I'm like, I don't need this in my life.
there's no reason to.
No.
There's absolutely no reason to. Like if you get nostalgic for like a late 80s, early 90s animated movie about dogs, go watch the fucking Billy Joel one where he Why Should I Worry? Why Should I Care? Where he's in the streets of New York. I can't remember the name of it.
Is
There's
it Lady and the
options.
Tramp?
No. It was I can't remember. God, I can't remember the name of it. The people listening are going to be like, I know what movie this is.
They're shouting at their phones right now.
Oliver and Company. There it is. I got
Yes.
it. Oliver and Company. There were much better. It was just like a wasteland of animated movies during that period.
That's
There's
true.
plenty to choose from.
Yeah.
So Ariel, you talk about not necessarily being, a transformative moment seeing Blair Witch Project, but certainly like part of a cumulative experience that you had with horror. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to find yourself creating the genre, actually writing about it, creating content about it? Is that something that came from formal education? Is that something that came from like the dark days of Web 1.0 when you were like, I'm going to jot some thoughts down online and see what happens?
Oh, those dark days of the early internet. No, it's actually very recent for me, relatively. I started writing in 2021. And it all sort of happened because during lockdown, I was watching the Saw franchise over and over again. Like it was just on repeat in my house, and I was just absorbing it because lockdown was a weird time for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I started to like think about themes of the films and wanting to explore them. So I went looking for something to read that would sort of like hit on what I was thinking. And I couldn't find anything about what I wanted to read about. So I just started sort of, like you said, jotting my thoughts down to sort of process what I was thinking about. And then I was like, oh, shoot, I really like writing. And I remember that I liked writing in high school, but like none of my formal education has to do anything with this. And so I was just kind of like, I don't know if this is going to be anything, but I'll just try writing and see what happens. And that happened to coincide with when Ghouls Magazine was just getting off the ground. Like the timing was perfect for me. Because they were looking for writers and I had zero experience, but they were trying to build something, from scratch. So I was like, we're a perfect fit for each other. So I've really only been writing since 2021. Horror for most of my life was like a very personal, almost private thing. Like in my family, we loved it together. And I had a couple friends growing up who were my little goblins with me, and we'd watch horror movies together. But I felt like most people I knew in real life didn't really want anything to do with it. Like a lot of the people I was friends with didn't want to watch these movies or talk about these movies. And so it was just almost sort of a private thing. And so writing about horror and being a part of like the quote unquote horror community has been like not to be dramatic, but it has been life-changing for me. Like it's the reason I was able to write a book. And just being able to find other people who talk to who want to, go on a deep dive of Saw 4 or whatever. Like I've never had that before in my life. So the last 3 years have been kind of crazy.
I know that a lot of the writing, I don't want to overgeneralize because you've done a lot of different type of writing, but I know that a lot of the stuff that you wrote for Ghouls in particular, it felt to me like it took more of that personal bent, right? You're talking
Mhm.
about sort of personal experiences with the genre, which is a type of writing I really admire. Donato and I always talk about, stylistic changes between people and how you prefer to write. And
Mhm.
I write a little bit more at a distance. I don't tend to talk about myself. And that's neither good nor bad. It just is. That's the most comfortable writing style for me. So can you talk a little bit about taking that more of a personal approach to film criticism and because you talk about it being such a private experience for you,
Mhm.
but a lot of your writing, you've actually been opening up the page and being like, join me on the journey, readers. Let's talk about my experiences growing up.
So there's reviewing films, there's film analysis, and then there's sort of like personal reactions, and there's obviously overlap between all of that.
Yeah.
And analyzing films, I love to do. It is a lot more work than writing personally, because when you're writing personally, you can just kind of put whatever you're feeling out there. And analysis takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more time. And that's worth doing. I love doing that too. But sometimes I would find there was a piece where part of my personal reaction was really important to the analysis I wanted to do. Like an article I'm really proud of that I wrote for Ghouls was a reaction to the human centipede and watching that in post Row America. It was called Eat Shit and Die. And it was about like bodily autonomy and like when you have control over someone's body.
Hmm.
And I couldn't write that without it being a little bit personal. And I think it was something where if I had tried to remove my personal reactions from it, it wouldn't have been as solid of a piece. So I think it's good to know when you should include yourself, when you shouldn't, and like what ultimately is going to make the piece stronger.
And I know that can be a tough line, especially for new writers to figure out, right? What you're describing, and even over the last 3 years, has become something that I would assume is a lot more intuitive for you. I think we've all certainly struggled with the notion of like, we've read really, really good personal writing and we're like, oh, that could work. That has big readers. Like, people love when you open up and you basically put your bloody heart on the table and be like, let me tell you about my traumas or my
Mhm.
sadness or my joys. But it's tricky. Like you said, not every
Yeah.
not every article, not every essay you set out to write is the right fit for that. And sometimes it's a little self-indulgent, and it's a tough
Yep.
thing as a writer to be like, when is this the right approach? When should I take a step back from what I'm doing?
Yeah, and it's okay to just write things for yourself too. Like, you know, not,
Yeah.
I if you're trying to get your writing out there, if you're trying to do it to make a living, obviously there's a difference. But I have a lot of like halfway written, unfinished personal thoughts like that I just have in a folder somewhere. And maybe someday they'll turn into something and maybe they won't. But it's okay. Like I've started pieces where I get partway through writing it and I'm like, I actually don't have a lot to say about this. I just have a lot of feelings. Like this should be a tweet, not a 3,000 word essay. So it's okay to like discover that as you're writing and decide to table it and move on to something else.
Yeah.
It's good to have that division too, because I've seen too often people online will do like one of those huge tweet threads about a very interesting topic that is
Mhm.
well thought out. And I just want to I want to go shake them and be like, stop tweeting, go write this, go get paid to write this thing. Like, I understand that social
Yes.
media is important and I understand that it is important to cultivate an audience and all these things. But man, like, all these ideas I see getting like wasted on social media where it'll get read
Yeah.
by sure tons of people, but like at the end of the day that's just gone when like you could have pitched that and turned it into an article. Like, I always take the approach of I'll send a no more than like two tweets connected, that's it, if I have an idea for a topic, and if I want to gauge that it's like, all right, do people actually give a shit, is this actually worth something, I'll just send
Right.
those two tweets and be like, all right, what does the world think? And if it goes dead, then sure, then it was
Yeah.
two tweets and it's over. If it gets attention, I'm like, cool, I have an article here. But no, I like that.
Yeah.
And it is hard because I do, as Monagle just said, like I put a lot of my personal into my writing. Like that is just how I've become the writer who I am, and that's how I found my voice.
Mm.
Is I'm way more comfortable with like putting myself out there and having that be the draw, because at the end of the day, I want you to read me for me. Like I do want you to understand my
Right.
perspective on this,
Mhm.
because that's all it is. Like this is my writing for my brain, for my opinions, and I like making it really clear that that's what that is. Like I like being a conversation starter. So yeah, it's funny. Like it's just
Mhm.
finding what works for you and finding that balance, because I think the one thing that every writer needs is like their own voice, and that doesn't work the same
Yes.
everywhere. Like I see too many writers try to emulate another writer, but it's like, okay, that sounds really awkward coming from you. So there's a lot of just like trying, repeating, and yeah, like not being afraid to write some things like you said, having some things for yourself, having some articles that maybe you just want to flesh out and see on your side. And I did that with one of my most important articles I ever wrote. Like I saw The Farewell and I wanted to write about like why that hit me so hard, because my grandma just died and like I didn't know if anyone would take it, so I wrote it for myself. Turned out to be really good and someone did. It's
Mhm.
sometimes you just got to get on the page.
Yep. Yeah, to like figure out what you have and go, okay, do I have something? Is this anything? And something I've been figuring out, as we're talking, Ghouls only closed recently. And I've
Yeah.
written for a few different places, including Certified Forgotten, but I mostly wrote for Ghouls. And so now I'm trying to like I was very comfortable in how I wrote for Ghouls, what I wrote for Ghouls, what they would take. An article called Eat Shit and Die about the human centipede. Like that's perfect for Ghouls. And so now I'm trying to find like what is my voice, what is my place out here, not as a former ghoul. So that's been kind of an interesting thing as a writer too, trying to find a home again, just sort of like where do I want to take my voice next?
That's the scary part of our industry too now. I can't tell you
Oh
how
my
many
god,
day to
yeah.
days is like not even like the scarcity of opportunities, but the opportunities I do have, and I'll have like three sites that I owe things for in a certain week, and having to write in three different voices because one site likes
Yes.
A, one site likes B. It feels like putting on a mask every time I write a different outlet.
Yeah, I was so spoiled just writing for ghouls for 3 years. So, I'm figuring it out. I'm pitching around. I'm out there, but I'm figuring it out.
Well, Ariel, speaking of you being out there, I want to talk a little bit about your upcoming book. So, you are going to be in September of this year, you're going to be publishing Millennial Nasties, analyzing a decade of brutal horror film violence.
Yes.
And there's a couple things that really excite me about this book. One of which is, and I hope you take this in the right way, I think you're skipping ahead a little bit. We always talk about the nostalgia factor of horror and really culture in general and how it's on a 30-year cycle, and the
Mhm.
fact that just now, right now, we're having conversations about mid 90s and late 90s horror, and we're figuring out what those canons should be and which movies that we all saw as kids are actually really really good and which ones were kind of shit, and it's good that we don't remember them. And so I love that you're a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to that stuff, that you're talking about 2000s horror and setting the part of what could be the conversation for the next decade as we're moving forward in time as film critics and as film lovers. So talk a little bit about this book, and in particular why you decided to focus in on that period of horror.
Yeah, thank you. I will take that as it was intended. Um so like the most basic part of the answer is I just love these movies and I just love this time period.
Yeah.
And this was a good time for me to write this book. But I do think I have been seeing, like, once I got it in my head to write this book, I started seeing people all over the internet talking about 2000s horror and torture porn. And some of that was probably just because it was top of mind for me. But I do think people are kind of looking back now. And even if we're not ready to completely have the conversation on it yet, I think we're starting to get there because when we were in this millennial nasty time period, it was hard to see it. Whenever you're in a time period, it's hard to see what its impact will be on history. And we're just at the 20-year mark of Saw this year. And so we're starting to be able to look back and go, what was the impact of these films? What was good about them? What wasn't? What didn't we catch at the time that we can see more clearly now that we're out of it? I think that enough time has passed to start looking at it. And this was another similar to how I got started writing. I was looking for a book like this and I didn't find one. There are some
Yep.
that there are some, and there are some really good books about 2000s horror, um, but not one that was just like a deep dive analysis of what the genre looked like at the time. So I was like, well, I guess I better write it then.
Yeah, and I think that's always something that I love about what we do is that you can think you have the best, most niche idea, and not only has somebody at a university written a paper about it, they've probably written
Yes.
an entire book out, right? So
Yes.
when we talk about what we're writing and what we're thinking about for general audiences, academics have been on this forever, and I'm sure that there were opportunities for you to pull a little bit of that into your own research. But speaking, I don't want to people should buy the book if they want to read all of it, is what I'm saying. It's available for pre-order right now on bardsandnoble.com. But speaking kind of generally, what are some of the main themes? What are some of sort of the political and societal factors that you think are going to be really key in helping us understand what 2000s horror looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big one that always comes up first is 9/11, and I did want to talk about that in my book, and I do, but it's not the only thing. So a lot of the horror analysis, especially of American horror films from this time period, focuses on the impact of 9/11. So talking about that and how it impacted America, but it impacted the whole world. It made other countries have opinions about America. It had Americans feeling unsafe in our homes. And as a culture, we started to glorify some things like guns and the military and really aggressive patriotism. And those are themes that you can see come out in the movies of this time period. The fear of having your home invaded was a big one. There's a lot of home invasion films during this time, or fear of the other. Especially, some of the remakes have that of, and the Wrong Turn franchise. It's sort of like we should fear people who are different from us. Um, there was also this big theme of vacations gone wrong. So, you travel somewhere outside of where you're welcome and horrible things will happen to you. That was a big theme at the time. Um, and running alongside all of that, we've got where we were culturally at the time with humor was, we acted like we fixed all the bigotry in the 90s. And so going into the 2000s, we were like, don't worry, guys, we did it. Racism, sexism, we got it. Don't worry. There's no other kind of bigotry. So now we can make racist and sexist jokes because we're all past it, right? So that led us to this really edgelordy, horror broy time in horror where there's a lot of stuff that, didn't age well and maybe wasn't good at the time. So throughout these movies where we're exploring like big global themes, we've also got to mix in a lot of things that I think are rightly being reevaluated now, like language and treatment of people. Um, I would say those are the big things to consider. And in my book, I'm focusing on the English language films because there's a lot of good analysis out there about New French Extremity, which was also going on at the time. And I feel like, not that there's nothing else to say about it, but like people were already talking about that. There's good stuff to read. Go read Alex West's book on French Extremity. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And a lot was coming out of Japan at the time too, but that's just not something I feel familiar enough with to write about. So I was really focused on English language films from this time.
And I
Yeah,
think it's interesting. Oh, sorry, Donato, go ahead.
oh no, I was going to let you go. I was just going to add to that. Like, I always find it interesting how, playing off what you just said about the French extremity and the Japanese extreme movement and stuff like that. Those were coming stateside, and like they were getting lauded, and like French extremity obviously had its detractors, but at the same time was a huge kind of swelling of praise came from all those movies, while at the
Yes.
same time like American movies that were trying the same thing were getting just absolutely bashed and ignored. And I've
Yep.
it's something that like I've been trying to push the same like conversations as you, like with the remake article, and I love whenever I get a 2000s remake and I'm like, cool, I'm gonna sit here and tell everyone how dumb they were for missing this, and like actually get into the fact that like why were critics ignoring these films? Why? Like all of that why that we'll get into later about Wrong Turn 2 specifically. I love that you're
Mhm.
putting it into academic book form because there is not enough out there about that. Like I'm so happy we're getting back to the point where I can write about something like Friday the 13th or one of those remakes from that era
Ah,
and be like, yeah,
got
Yep.
it's
to.
crazy.
Love
Yeah,
'em.
like it's crazy that it's at like 24% on Rotten Tomatoes and like it's ignored and hated and all
It's
that stuff. And
offensive.
it's insane. Like it's crazy to
Yeah.
me. So I'm
Yeah.
really happy that we are, as Monagle said, fast forwarding to kind of readdressing that because number one, I just want to push that conversation even harder and actually have them. But like number two,
Mhm.
like it's time. Like literally it's been long enough. Like I love looking back and going, how the fuck did that era of horror get so hated and overlooked at the time?
Yep.
And it's sort of a timely, Ariel talking about humor. I mean, today is the I'm not a musician person overly so. I certainly don't know like a lot of grunge or metal bands or scenes that came up in the 80s and 90s. But I know that today, famous Chicago-based musician and producer and sound engineer Steve Albini died, and a lot of people have been sort of posting on social media his own journey as sort of apologizing and evolving from what he describes as the edgelord bullshit that he
Mm.
came up with, as a musician in the 90s. And so I've seen a lot of really great threads from people that are film and musician fans that have talked about how this person was able to sort of grapple with the notion that, exactly as you said, that like, early 2000s, things like that, we thought we were good. Like we
Mhm.
really thought that we were entering a brand new era. And it is a strange and tricky thing to have to go back and sort of reevaluate, let's call it the South Parkness of it all, right? And say, did we really have creative license to do things in the way that we were doing them? And what does it say about us now when we're kind of looking back on that? The humor piece is really interesting to me.
And even South Park has grown. I love South Park. So like
Sure.
you can
Yes. Yeah.
really see their character arc over their whole careers. Yeah.
I mean, the humor aspect of it too is like just having to address the fact that when talking about something like Wrong Turn, just I know it's the movie and we'll get to it later, but that was about 2007, and the humor that it
Right.
was playing off of, the edgelord bullshit, like that was coming off the back end of major mainstream comedies being like American Pie and Eurotrip and
Yes.
Road Trip, and like that entire period of comedy was so incredibly obviously sexist and inappropriate and all these things looking back on it now. But that was
Yeah.
common. That's what it was. And like that shaped so many years of movies and so many behavioral things. And like to look back on that, I think that's one of the craziest things to remember being a kid. And those are the movies that are in
Yes.
theaters and now being
Yes.
here, and being a critic, like reviewing Promising Young Woman, like like it's just one of the craziest things of like, holy fucking whiplash in hindsight.
It
Yeah.
is whiplash, yeah. Because it doesn't feel like it feels really fast, even though it wasn't, where we were suddenly in one sort of cultural mindset to another. It wasn't fast, but it does kind of feel that way when there's a stark difference. So it's good. It's worth exploring, and I like to consider, I jokingly sometimes say, "Oh, the 2000s, it was a different time," but like it really was. And that doesn't excuse anything that is, wrong, but it does matter. Like, how were people talking at that time? And was this something you'd hear every day versus now where it would be so shocking? So
Yeah.
I think it does matter.
Well, I can feel the conversation already starting to tug its way to Wrong Turn too. So I think we just need to go there. And
Let's
so
do
when
it.
we come back, we're going to talk about the movie that Ariel brought for us today, which is Joe Lynch's Wrong Turn 2. God help me, we're going to have this conversation. We'll be back in just a sec. Hey, just a friendly reminder that we are moving to a brand new podcast cadence. That's right, Certified Forgotten is going from bi-weekly to weekly, but we're alternating episodes. Every other week, you will get a normal episode of Certified Forgotten featuring a film with 10 or fewer reviews and a wonderful guest. And every other week, you're going to get something a bit more contemporary. Myself and Methanata will be talking about a relatively new release, something you might have actually already seen. And for 30 minutes, a much shorter runtime, we'll dig a little bit into why we like that movie, why we didn't like that movie, and what we think the importance of it should be. As always, thank you so much for subscribing to Certified Forgotten and for listening to this podcast. Let's take it back to the show. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So, on this week's episode, as you saw by the title, we're going to be talking about the 2007 direct-to-video Joe Lynch horror film, Wrong Turn 2, Dead End. Sometimes, when the mood or the spirit strikes me, I write my own little synopsis from scratch. A detailed overview, sort of a glimpse behind the scene, really tapping into my inner marketer and giving you 300 perfect words or less to describe a movie. This time I'm just going to say it's about a group of reality television crew that gets attacked and killed by redneck cannibals. I sat and looked at my open Word document for a minute and I was like, there's no other information needed here. And I'm gonna preface this by saying, if you are a longtime listener in the show, you know right away who's gonna love this movie in the conversation and who is maybe gonna have a little bit more a little bit of a tougher time digesting it, pun intended. But Ariel, I want to start with you and say, first of all, you brought us 2000s horror, which I love. But what made this the movie you knew you wanted to talk about on the podcast?
Yeah. Well, so when I knew we were going to do this episode, I wanted to pick something from the book so that it would tie in nicely.
Nice.
And this Rotten Tomatoes niche, it does make for an interesting sort of you guys know you do the thing. So I started looking up titles from the book that I thought were lesser known, like Captivity and P2 and Hatchet. And all of those had more than 10 reviews. Some of them had a ton more. And I was like, surely not Wrong Turn 2. And it fit the criteria. And I happen to just adore this movie. I think it's really fun. I think it's a really good example of where we were at in the 2000s, especially 2007. And we can talk about what I mean by that. But there's a lot in it that is just, it's like a time capsule of 2007 to me. And I think it's better than the first one. And so I really want to get the word out there. Like, even if Wrong Turn wasn't your thing, the second one is so much fun. You should just give it a try.
Donato, I'm curious. I think I know. I think I know. I know. We've been doing this a long time. I know. What are your thoughts on Wrong Turn 2?
It's the best of the franchise. We are in agreement there. And in the monocle to Donato scale, this is definitely a Donato movie. It is gory, goopy. I mean, Joe Lynch is very good at delivering the practical effects. Again, for the time period, is some of the story work a little dated by this point? Does it hit the same way? We'll get into that later, I'm sure. But for my money, like, for a direct-to-video slasher sequel about, the other, this time being like rednecks in the woods who were deformed and all that stuff, it's inventive. Like, it immediately takes something that is a simple concept. Wrong turn, the first one, you took a wrong turn and you're gonna die. In this one, like, it's about a reality show, so not only is it a commentary on slasher films themselves and sequels, but it is a commentary on reality show culture and the survivors and all that stuff, the Amazing Race. So I think it's actually a splendid little way to make a sequel that is bigger and kind of has more thought to it and bring in some other commentary than just regurgitating what was done before. So I do give this sequel a lot of credit. I mean, for what else we've gotten in the Wrong Turn franchise, this is leaps and bounds. Howdy. Yeah, exactly. Leaps and bounds better. We're pro Wrong Turn 2 in this household. Wrong Turn 2 Dead End.
Yeah, thank you for the whole name in there.
Not to be confused with Joyride, Roadkill, or Rest Stop Dead Ahead. My God. The 2000s horror shelf is confusing.
Sometimes a digit's enough. You don't need to add everything after that. Yeah, I look, this one's not about me. It's about the two of you. Let's keep that conversation going.
Just pushing that one to the side.
Listen, here's what I'll say. I texted Donato. I'm going to quote what I texted him after I finished watching it earlier this week, because I'd seen the original Wrong Turn a long time ago. Hadn't seen this one. Sat down and watched it. I texted Donato verbatim, holy shit, like, I get it, but holy shit, not for me. Which is the thing, right? Like, that is not in any way for me an indication that this is a bad movie or that folks should be like, oh, like, it is the most important thing. And the reason that Donato and I play up the Monagle and Donato movie so much is because this is the worst possible movie for me to enjoy. It has everything that I don't like in a movie. But while I was watching it, I was like, that's smart. That's smart. That's clever. I get what they're doing there. I love that they're doing. I want to watch that reality television show. And so I think that's one of the things that we like to stress on the podcast is the notion of like, it's fun for Donato and I to have our lanes and for movies to fall in them. But there are going to be people that think this is the worst. Like I've been on the letterbox. There are people that think this is the worst movie that's ever happened. And there are people that give it 4 or 5 stars and are like, this is incredible. Look what this person was able to do with a direct to video budget. And I think both of those are totally true and valid reads, you know?
If anyone thinks this is the worst movie they've ever seen, they clearly haven't watched Wrong Turn 3. So
You
just
had to go one
saying.
more movie in the franchise. You just had to go one more movie.
It's real rough.
We talked a little bit about humor with regards to your book. And I want to use that as kind of a jumping off point here, because this is, I mean, Joe Lynch has described this as kind of like his Evil Dead to the original's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which Evil Dead is I think the first one more so than the second one. I think this one's pretty gnarly. But I want to talk about the thread of meta humor and like the exaggeration and almost the goofiness that this film has, because I don't think that that's what I thought I was going to go in, you know, having kind of like the mothballs of memory of Wrong Turn kicking around in my head. So talk to me about tone, Ariel, in this film and what Lynch is trying to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the setup of the reality TV show is brilliant. The show is called Ultimate Survivor, or US for short. And the setup is the apocalypse has happened and, quote, the government is no longer in control, right? So very 2007 America, this, you know, we have to protect ourselves, we have to protect each other. It's being run by a retired Marine. So he's like really aggressive and in your face. So we've got this setup of America loves reality TV. We've got all different types of opinions right now about the government and about the state of the world. So it's playing on all of that. And it's definitely playing into some horror tropes, but it's also subverting them. So, you know, you've got the one character, Jonesy, who's hitting on everybody, but he's so over the top that it's like it's so clearly sarcastic and not meant to be taken seriously. Like we're supposed to sort of like roll our eyes at him. And then you've got like the super aggressive vegan Nina, who is just like the rudest person ever, but ends up being our final girl, who you do not think that's going to happen. And so
Yeah.
it takes all these things that we think we can expect and turns them on our heads while making a lot of meta jokes about the culture at the time. And I think it's brilliant. It works perfectly.
Well, and I think keeping with the way it subverts, the biggest one for me is Mara. We're
Yes.
introduced early on to the producer who has to fill in for a contestant we know is brutally murdered already.
Mm-hmm.
But Mara is also, dating one of the show creators and all that stuff. And well, what happens is you're set up to believe they will be the final girl. Like that's the introduction here, especially because we get the cheesy as fuck like bound chicka wow wow moment where
Yes.
her boyfriend is given a blowjob by one of the other contestants in a, again, playing it up super tropey, super look at how sleazy this industry is kind of way. Mara sees it, and now you're officially like, oh, this guy's gonna die brutally and Mara's going to be the final girl. And for Mara to be like one of the first deaths out of all the contestants, just that axe to the head moment, it kind of lifts a little bit of that comfort that we have in a horror film, in a slasher, because we're sitting there going, we know what's going to happen. We know this trajectory. We've seen this a billion times. Mara goes down so hard and dies hard. And it's like, oh, I don't know where this is going now. I have no idea. So like that subversion is so important. And again, why I know Lynch was thinking a few steps ahead versus just churning something out.
Exactly. Yes. And the second movie, it answers some questions from the first movie that it didn't necessarily need to, but In the first movie, we only see male cannibals, and people were like, how can they be like, how can they keep going? So in the second movie, we get female cannibals and a really horrendous cannibal birth on a kitchen table. And so it's sort of like, okay, here you go, fans. You wanted this, and now you've got it. And we get some more lore and backstory about the mill. We get a harbinger, but who he's actually in on it. Like every time you think you know it, it flips something else on you.
Monica, you made quite a noise to the birth scene.
I listen. It's still dead alive forever in terms of births or reverse births or whatever you want to call them. But this is the closest. I will admit, this is the closest I've come to being like, all right, Peter Jackson, you're there's not as much distance between you and the runners up as you think there might be.
Have you seen Inside?
No.
Okay.
I'm gonna get Monocle to watch Inside eventually for the column because it's immaculate. Inside is so good. But I am curious to see Monocle's take on such a film.
Yeah, I'm gonna need your reaction immediately after you watch it.
I can do that. Yeah, I listen, I don't think of myself as somebody who's overly squishy, right? Like, and I'm not saying that you guys are saying that. I am saying that Donato's saying that a little bit. I'm not saying that you
I'm
guys
not
are saying
saying
that.
shit.
I know.
I'll take full responsibility for that. I am saying it.
It's true. It's true. Well, one of us writes an annual column with the greatest kills for Fangoria, and the other one doesn't. So that says pretty much all you need to know there. But what I will say is that there are types of horror that I think are more prevalent in this particular period.
Yes.
That sort of, I as much as I talk about the formative experiences of me falling in love with the genre at in high school, be in afterwards, and as much as I honed in on kind of like my type of anxiety attack, like panic attack horror, that is sort of what I'm known for among the people that pay attention to my types of movies. There is also the 2000s thing is interesting because I saw Cabin Fever and I could not. I saw the first Hostel and I could not. It really there is an amount of bodily violence that I associate with this period that you can call it torture porn, you can call it whatever you want, like, but it is sort of and I'm sure you talk about torture was in the headlines and like all this other stuff and like American sensitivity towards this kind of thing was running rampant. But at the end of the day, I watch horror movies because I want nobody to die. And I feel like I am out of step with most of the filmmakers of this particular period, not because they're being necessarily cruel, even. Like, I don't think Joe Lynch is being cruel to his characters. I think what they're doing is exactly as Donato described. They're subverting expectations, but that means the characters are going to die to play against type and not because they should or shouldn't survive. And there's parts of me that has a hard time with that. Anytime a character dies for anything other than it is the natural conclusion of who they are as a person, I can appreciate it, but it draws a little bit of line for me where I'm like, I am appreciating this intellectually, but I'm not feeling it emotionally, which is, I think probably something both of you know that experience when you see it happen in movies.
Yeah, and that is totally valid. Like, I think everybody has, like, every horror fan has stuff where they're like, that one's not really for me. And I absolutely love the brutal violence and the grisly kills of the 2000s. Like that. Yeah. I take a nap to House of a Thousand Corpses. The Collector is a comfort film. Like, this is just where I live. And I don't say that because I'm like some cool tough girl. Like, it's just what I like. And so to me, because I simply like it without being able to explain it, I can absolutely understand how someone could feel the opposite.
I'm going to say, Ariel, I do think that you are a cool, tough girl, though. So you have, if nothing else, you've earned that reputation with me.
Okay, I'm a big softie.
But I mean, if we're gonna we're talking about the practical effects, we're talking about things that make us uncomfortable and things of that nature. I do think Wrong Turn 2, its intro kill of the actress who just gets absolutely eviscerated. It's the first glimpse of gore that we're getting from Joe Lynch ever. It's such a formative moment for his career and for where it would go. But it's so goddamn good and like one of my favorite intro kills I think ever, because talking about setting that tone, I think I've mentioned it before, like just the way that axe comes down on that woman's body and completely splits it in
Mhm.
half without having to show the split, but we still get the detail of all the organs hitting that concrete, and you can just hear the
And then the
thwap and
dragging
the
away.
dragging away. Like, it is such a smart kill, and I talk about that like through composition, through everything. Like, clearly Joe Lynch has to work on a budget here. Clearly
Mhm.
he wants to make that work as best as he can. And I think that opening kill sequence is one of my favorite opening kills ever. And boy, does it set that tone so well.
It's incredible, and it's foreshadowed because the actress arrives at a split in the road, and she's like, "Which way do I go?" And you know, you think it's so they can get in the "you don't want to make a wrong turn" joke, and that is there, and that's great. And we're like, "Yay, they said it." But then it's like, "Oh no, that's literally what's about to happen to her." And you also see, so she gets dragged away. The other contestants are like, "Where's Kim? She never showed up. Oh, Mara, you have to do it." Later, the reality show contestants are eating her body without realizing it. Like, they think there's just been a barbecue set up for them, which I don't know what makes them think that in the whole setup of this show, why they think there would
Mhm.
be a random barbecue. And also, who eats found meat in the woods? But whatever. They realize they're eating a human. And so, like, that's another way this movie sort of takes it a step further than the first one. In the first Wrong Turn, you know, we're disgusted by the cannibalism, but we're sort of separate from it. In the second movie, we're over the shoulder with the characters who are really enjoying some barbecue and then realize it's human and we're disgusted along with them. I mean, we probably saw it coming, but the idea is you're supposed to be happy along with these characters and then suddenly disgusted with them. And it's a great way to use cannibalism, I think.
And I want to ask both of you, because I know this is very much in both your wheelhouses. One of the things that the movie gets to do by being a reality show within a film is it gets to play with a little bit of first person. It gets to
Yes.
do a little bit of that handheld stuff, and really toy with that in a way that a lot of movies don't get to do halfway, right? They either have to commit completely or it's all found footage or it's not.
Yep.
This movie, I think, does a really amazing job of using both types of horror filmmaking to great effect. So I'd love to hear from both of you. And Ariel, we'll start with you. You know, kind of what you think of how Wrong Turn 2 and how Lynch are able to play with that first person perspective throughout the course of the movie.
It's a great conceit because we all know reality TV is scripted and designed and produced. Like, a lot of things on reality TV aren't really real. And so we're watching the making of a reality TV show. And so we're seeing a character act two separate ways: how they act for the camera for the reality TV show, and then how they really act, just for us. So it shows us, some of the how they're trying to act for the camera. Are they acting more shallow? Are they acting like they're a little bit deeper than we think they are? Like, how do they want to seem? So it's a really efficient way to get us into the minds of the contestants. Um, and because they are using like some handheld cameras and like some GoPros and things like that, we're able to get cool shots like running through the woods, which makes us think of Evil Dead. And the shots from within the trailer where the director is like watching violence happen, but it's not to him yet. We get to
Mm-hmm.
sample all these little different types of horror within this frame narrative. And I just think it's so creative, and I can't really think of other examples that have done that so well.
Yeah, we would have to wait until we start getting into like screen life before we
Yes.
would get another subgenre of horror really doing this, because what we're able to do is see what's happening in front of the screen and behind the screen. And that's important because if we're going to have a commentary on reality television, we have to have the commentary be about how fake reality television is. It's all
Yes.
scripted, it's all produced. I've had a buddy who worked on Survivor. He was like one of the guys who set up all the obstacles, and he was sitting up late at night with a camera just recording, waiting for stuff to happen, but also like, let's just say things, hey, you gotta instigate things sometimes. Like, that's
Right.
what is shown here. It's, the producer is dictating, all right, I know how I want these storylines to go. And I do love the different perspectives we get, because when the camera's on and we're seeing it through the camera's lens, that is what the
Mhm.
people at home would be seeing should that footage
Mhm.
ever have made it out of the woods. But then, we get the behind the scenes too of what they're talking about, what they're angry about, what they don't like about it. And it's effective. It's the same way of live streaming, like, something like Mind, Body, Spirit just came out literally like a few days ago. And it's about a yoga influencer who just goes through a haunting and it's all live streamed. So it's the
Mhm.
same thing of that ability of being able to watch something happen through a screen and through a means of like, oh, this live streaming is usually so safe and usually so this, and this is what we think about it. But when the camera
Mhm.
doesn't turn off, you start to see all the things that would have been behind it. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
smart.
And I also love, Ariel, that you intro this film inadvertently by talking about Fern Gully, which is sort of a surprisingly
Yes.
apt analogy for what this film is doing. We talk a lot about direct to video, and films of this ilk sometimes being exploitation, that they exist for no other purpose than to cash in on a title, to continue a series, to retain legacy rights, whatever the reason may be. But again, this movie is introducing notions of environmentalism, of capitalism, of the people that get left behind in the name of
Yes.
progress, and what organizations will, the ecological disasters that happen when some of these big companies just shut down one day. So I want to know a little bit about what the revelation of sort of the toxic waste and the wood mill that's left behind in the camp, how that relates to the family of cannibals, and what that does in terms of making this a surprisingly interesting message movie too.
Yeah. So the lore that we learn is that there was some mill that all the locals worked at, and it got shut down and they lost their jobs. And then also there was the um like the land was poisoned and the water was polluted, which led to birth defects. Um and so that explains some of what we see of how the people look. But then also it started to become an isolated community, and so then there started to be inbreeding, and so then that contributed to more birth defects. And then there started to be a lack of food because there was no work, and all the vegetation was dying and all the animals were dying, so they had to start eating people. And it's an extreme example, but it is this sort of idea of like, when you rip away the livelihood of an entire community and go scorched earth and like poison the well, nothing good can be left behind. um it's very similar to the themes you explore in The Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah, and I know that the film kind of culminates with that action sequence at the wood mill, and
Yes.
we've been having smart conversations about environmentalism and about the intertextuality of found footage and how that fits within the aesthetic. Let's just talk about Henry Rollins going to war with dynamite arrows during that what is effectively like a 15-minute action movie sequence to end the film. Like what I was watching between my fingers at that point. But I will also admit, like that's the stunt work in this movie is kind of wild. Again,
It
for like a
is.
direct to video movie, there's a lot of really interesting things happening, and it really delivers on sort of a third act, final battle between these two forces in a way that a lot of these movies can't even begin to do.
So, one of the wonderful things about having sort of like a nondescript mill where we don't really know what they did is we get to have a lot of machinery and just a lot of like metal cages and chains and things. And we don't have to explain what they do or what they did. They're just there. And so then we get to use all of that to our advantage. Dale, the Marine, just goes absolutely bananas in the last act, and he's incredible, saving everybody's lives, which was, in the 2000s. It was a big thing to show military personnel as heroes, and so we definitely do that in this movie. I think a couple of the smartest things that happen in the last act aren't even the goriest. So earlier in the movie, we find out that Nina has been self-harming and we see some scars. But then to like escape, she has to, as Jigsaw would say, cut herself again when she's like got this barbed wire wrapped around her wrist. So we see her having to confront that. She is aggressively vegan, but she has to save someone by ripping the neck out of a cannibal with her teeth. And then we've got I can't remember the football player character's name off the top of my head, but he's got a bad shoulder. And he sacrifices his shoulder to save Nina, who was so rude to him. It's like all these little breadcrumbs that started throughout the film get paid off in the last act. And they didn't need to do all that. They didn't need to pay that much attention, but they did.
Yeah, that's a Texas Battle playing Jake, and
Yes.
I like his character. I really like his character, and talking about Jonesy being the stereotype that he is, and whether it's subverting or not, like it might not be for you or not. Someone like Jake is a character who stands out to me because, again, the jock who falls on hard times, his arc could have been very different. He could have been a very different type of person. And I like how he's the one who at the end is, he's messing with Nina at the beginning, but they're the ones at the end trying to save each other and do that. It's again a nice culmination of arcs and the way they come together, while Henry Rollins is blowing people the fuck up. Like this is A+ Henry Rollins.
Yes.
I love this dude. Whenever he gets to play in a horror movie, it is just next level. Feast is one of my all-time favorite like comfort horror movies, and just him in that is A+. But getting him here is like the real militant reality show host who also proves himself. I like his arc too, because other movies you have the reality show host who's a fake, a fraud. Here, man, like the way he blows up the old man and the way he sticks the dynamite in him, we see that practical effect. It's fun to watch, but getting that, I forget his line he says right after it, but he says the cheesiest like soldier boy line. And like Rollins doing it is just so on key. He is so good in living that life. And yeah, Rollins was just like one of those great choices to bring. Also, hilariously, in the first scene, when Kim is talking on the phone, I'm hearing the voice again, and I'm like, is that fucking Patton Oswalt? I look at the credits, and I'm like, that's Patton. God damn it. Like, Patton's the voice on the phone in the first, it just made me laugh so hard that I've missed that before.
So I want to ask both of you, not our last question, but our penultimate question. I want to end with something in my comfort zone and talk about how good do you think that the game that they set up for the Apocalypse Survivor thing was? Because I'm not going to lie, there is a part of me that wanted them, and this is probably the board game nerd of me, I wanted them to find every single one of those radiation cards and like learn what the metagames of each of those was. I wanted to find like what would it take for us to find somebody who will turn the fake game show from this movie into a real game show, because I would watch the shit out of that right now. That was so much fun.
That makes me think of Escape Room, which I really like. If you've seen Escape Room. Yeah, I didn't care about the game in this movie at all. So I don't know what that says about me.
Bummer.
I like
you mention it. Yeah.
I like the game in it, and what made me think of is like in Jersey they do like the Crystal Lake sleepover, and you can like go sleep over in the camp and do all that stuff. So I think if it was in a bigger franchise, there would be that pull to do that. There would be some millionaire, billionaire who's like, I'm going to set this up and just have fun with it. But unfortunately, I don't think Wrong Turn is a big enough franchise to pull that off.
Maybe if we believe.
We can. If we believe hard enough.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm thinking, Donato. You and I pitch the folks at Brooklyn Horror Film Festival and say that next year we're gonna play a live action game of the Apocalypse thing in the woods of Long Island, and probably everybody will make it back.
Which Joe Lynch has ties to. I think we can get Lynch on board with this too. He was at Brooklyn Horror Film Festival, I think year one with Mayhem. It would be a reunion of sorts. I'm absolutely in on it. I'm gonna pitch him on it. It'll be the 20th anniversary in 2027 when we're still doing this podcast strong and we go back to Brooklyn.
Yeah, and by then we'll have movies all the way up to 15 reviews and Rotten Tomatoes by that point. So sky's the limit for us.
15, 16, who knows?
All right, that wasn't the real last question. Ariel, I'm not going to make you talk about the game on that show. The real last question that we always ask our guests on Certified Forgotten is, this film has 10 or fewer reviews. Obviously, it's tied to a big franchise, so it has a huge leg up on some of the other titles we've discussed. But it doesn't have the kind of attention that it deserves. And to hear the two of you talk about it, and to know that there are a lot of horror fans out there that would probably gobble this up, there is more of an opportunity for this movie to be discovered as we go more and more into 2000s and understanding that period of film. So what, Ariel, do you think it will take for a movie like Wrong Turn 2 to earn its spot among some of the direct-to-video 2000s greats?
I am hopeful that the conversations I've seen lately with people paying attention to 2000s horror and people kind of looking back and going, oh, wait, was there some good stuff there? Which hopefully I can be a part of some of those conversations. I think that will get people looking back on this. And I also think like, um, the era of horror we've been in for the past 10ish years has been incredible. Don't get me wrong, but it hasn't always been the most fun. And I think where people are horror fans are wanting a little bit more fun lately. And so if you're out there digging around for a horror movie to just have a ball with, like, it's Wrong Turn too. And so if we can get the word out there that like this can be a good break if you need a break from grief allegories or whatnot, you can pop on Wrong Turn 2, you'll be okay.
Donato.
Yeah, I think this is one of those films that does have the legacy, because a friend of the show, BJ Colangelo, and co-host of This Ends at Prom, like she wrote a Wrong Turn ranking for slash film, and that's at the top. Wrong Turn 2 is number one, and that is a shared. I believe that is a shared kind of truth with a lot of horror fans, and especially Wrong Turn fans. So like it does have that staying power verbally, the way people talk about it, which is a good thing. I think it's just part of, when we look back on it, before I came on here, I tweeted, and I just tweeted a simple, can't believe some of the movies that sometimes meet our criteria. Like, it's wild to me that we're just talking about Wrong Turn 2 now on this podcast, about 10 or less critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. But yeah, why? Because at that time, talking about the 2000s, talking about a period of criticism, and especially with Rotten Tomatoes and who was approved to post on there, it did not have the horror representation it has now. We have so many more horror critics on Rotten Tomatoes than we did back then. Like, then you could really only depend on like Scott Weinberg, Stacey Lane Wilson, a few of them. There's a handful, and they're on all of them. Like, Scott's on every single one of these. Like, it's, who the reviews you can look for. But that also meant that critics did not give a shit, or sorry, the Rotten Tomatoes critic pool, let's say, did not give a shit about direct to video horror in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
There was a stigma back then. It doesn't have the same kind of ring it has now. So it never was going to get its due. It was never going to get what it deserved from the critics. I think there's still plenty of time for a resurgence, let's say. It's unfortunately part of a franchise that is known for not being really great outside of a handful of movies. It's kind of like the Tremors franchise in that way, where we all love our few Tremors movies, but there's a lot to dig through there. So it's going to take a lot, but I think that 20-year anniversary, I think that could be something special. Hopefully it gets a really cool, release from a boutique label, something like that. And we can go from there, because it does deserve it. It's definitely is one of those 2000 slashers that has endured. It's in the same conversation of Hatchet, like you mentioned before, Ariel. And like, it's there. Like, we had good slashers back then. I always get mad when people talk about, original slashers went away, and, with Scream, and it's like, no, they didn't. You just weren't looking. Like, they're everywhere. Even now, international slashers are doing everything that we want our slashers to do. But like, you're the one that has to go onto Netflix and find The Conference, like, for example.
And I'll add that, this may not be a monocle movie in the same way that the Texas Chainsaw movies are not monocle movies. But I think that this, for all the reasons, Ariel, that you've talked about today, I think that this is such a, if nothing else, a fascinating time capsule of a period in American history, of a period in filmmaking history, of a transitional period between theatrical to direct-to-video to now, or direct-to-video to now streaming. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of film that 1,000 college students can, should, and will write, end of quarter, end of semester essays about. And it is the sort of movie where, like, I may never watch it again, but anytime somebody writes something about Wrong Turn 2, I'm going to go seek that out. I'm going to read it. I'm going to share it with my audience, because it is a gross and beautiful and rich text for horror fans to be grappling with. And those, in a weird kind of way, are some of my favorite movies to watch, where I'm like, absolutely not for me, but I can't wait to watch everybody write about it for years and years and years to come. So I hope that's how more people are introduced to it too, is, they hear about it from somebody like an Ariel who writes something and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that you could look at this through the lens of post 9/11, or that you could look through the lens of, how this was fitting into all of these vacation or home invasion, or basically you're not safe in places you thought you were safe in. I love that. And I want to read all of those pieces, even if this is, maybe, knock on wood, we'll see, the last Wrong Turn movie I ever watch. All right. Well, that is it for our podcast. Ariel, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. This is your time to talk not only about your book, but anything else that's coming out that you might want to let our listeners know about, and the places they should go to follow you online and see what's new.
Before I do that, can I share a Wrong Turn 2 fun fact?
Yes.
Okay. So this movie has, and Matt Donato, this will be up your street. We've got 3 remake queens in this movie. So we've got Young-K Crystal Lowe, who was in the remake of Black Christmas. We've got, I can't think of her name, but the woman who plays Nina is in the Texas Chainsaw remake. And we've got the, gosh, oh my God, it's like I didn't write anything down. The woman who's Jonesy's counterpart, the other Marine, she's in The Hills Have Eyes 2. So this is just a who's who.
Playing a Marine? Like, because aren't they Marines in that one too? Or they're military, right?
They're military. Yeah, she's one of the military in that movie too. So
that's
this
so
is just
funny.
all our remake queens in one place.
I love that. There are some, I love the crossover when you start to get into that. When you say Black Christmas, are we talking about 2006 Black Christmas to be fair? Okay, just curious, because I was like,
Black Xmas.
But yeah, sorry, Black Xmas. Don't open the presents.
Yes. I love Black Christmas. But yes, thank you. So you can pre-order my book if you want to. Encyclopocalypse.com. If you go to any of my socials, I'll have the pre-order link there. I'm on all the socials at Ari_Hellraiser. And my book is available internationally. It's not always obvious right away. You got to scroll down the page, but you can order physical copies all over the world. And if you just follow my Twitter and my Instagram, you will find everything I do, pretty much.
I love that. And thank you for the fun fact. I feel like that's the sort of thing people should follow you online to see more of, ? Maybe?
Oh, yeah. I got all types of fun facts.
There we go.
That you could find yourself on IMDb, but I'll just put them out there for you. It's real easy. Facts
that you find on IMDb yourself are not fun facts. They're just facts. Donato, how do we follow you online? With you've got a bunch of stuff coming out, including a list for Inverse you worked really hard on that I'm excited to read.
Have fun reading that and telling me how I'm wrong, like everybody else. You can
find me. You published it on Inverse, not IGN, so you're good. You're safe.
That is fair. No comments on that one. People just text me when I'm wrong. You can find me at Donato Bomb, Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram, Blue Sky, all the places that are social medias. It's at Donato Bomb. And yes, Mr. Monocle is correct. I just wrote a list of the 50 quote unquote best, in my opinion, sci-fi horror films. You will probably disagree with me. You'll probably, I don't know, if you get past number 50 with Doom, congratulations. There's more surprises. But in addition to that, I am also a full-fledged critic. Plenty of reviews that will be coming out, plenty of interviews, plenty of everything. So follow the socials. You'll see everything.
And tune in. The last time we recorded an episode, you were like, "Oh, I need to do this more often." Tune in for the Merry Hour.
Yeah, I do a live stream with Perry Nemiroff. It's every weekend. I don't know which day it is. We kind of have to just figure out which day it works, but we'll always tweet it out. So again, if you're following the socials, you got me on live streams, you got me on podcasts. I was just on Spectre Cinema. We ranked every single VHS segment. This is the kind of shit I do for you people.
Crazy, by the way. I mean, it was great, but it was crazy.
Yeah, it was work. We put work in. That was that was a thing. Luckily I like the franchise, so not the worst thing, but
I wish I had those kind of interesting stories to share right now, but I've just been traveling a bunch for family and otherwise. So I'm in a bit of a dead spot. But you can absolutely find my writing at monocle.bluesky.app or whatever that chart string is. I would encourage you to visit certifiedforgotten.com and check out some of the really incredible writing we have, including pieces already written by Ariel, if you like what she had to say today. And I would double encourage you to go to patreon.com/certifiedforgotten. Sign up for our free newsletter where we talk about everything that we've published and all the new podcast episodes that go up every week. And maybe if you really like what you see, throw a couple of bucks our way and, support. Just a general plea in honor of ghouls. If you love a publication, support it, because it's tough out there and not everything survives. And, if you can't financially support something, share articles, leave reviews for podcast episodes. Doesn't even need to be us. I'd love it if it was us, but just take a publication you love and go give it some love. They need it. Everybody needs it right now. It's hard out there.
God,
No,
yeah,
I'll say it
yeah.
should be us. You should be doing it for us. Go. What are you doing right now? Just hit stop. Go rate us.
Don't hit stop now because we're not at the end of the episode. And if you listen on a platform like Apple Podcast, you'll have to reopen the podcast episode to listen to the last 30 seconds. It's a whole thing. I know what's up. Ariel, it was great to have you on the show. We look forward to you coming back, I hope sometime soon, with another 2000s horror movie. I would love to give this lane for you to occupy among all of our podcast episodes.
Truly, it would be an honor. So anytime, I'd be happy to come back. Thanks so much for having me.
Donato, take us home like you do.
Why didn't they have fucking voices?